Hello, I am Dustin Pickering, and this is Parrot TV Literary Corner. And today we have a fabulous guest, very unique, Lyn Coffin. She is an award winning fiction writer, poet, playwright, and translator. Her most recent publication was a novel, The Aftermath, published by Adelaide Books in 2020. A book of Sestina's and Villanelle's is forthcoming from my own Transcendent Zero Press. More than 30 of her books have been published by Doubleday, Ithaca House, Avatar Editions, and others. One of her short fictions was included by Joyce Carol Oates in Best American Short Stories 1979. The first Honeymoon New and Selected Stories was published by Iron Twine Press in 2015. She was associate editor of the Mission Quarterly for several years and Joseph Brodsky's teaching assistant for 2 years when he was at the University of Michigan. Her poems have won many awards and been published in over 100 literary reviews and magazines. Her plays have been performed in several cities and worldwide, including Singapore, New York, off-Broadway, and Detroit. She was a recipient of the Michigan Council for the Arts grant and a National Endowment for the Humanities Award. She lives in Seattle. Hi, Lyn. Thanks for joining us today. How are
Hi,
you?
I'm fine. It's good to be here. Nice to see you, sort of.
Sort of. So my first question, I want to talk about your recent novel. What was the basic premise of it, and what was the process like putting it together and getting it published?
Well, the premise, it's about healing from trauma. So the prologue describes in sort of hallucinatory fashion a trauma, a rape, and then after that, it's the course that the young woman follows. She's unable to face what's happened because of her childhood. This is sort of known to be a badge of traumatic experience, especially as a child. So she's unable to face that, and when she finds out she's pregnant, she thinks it's her boyfriend's child and has all kinds of nice fantasies. Anyway, and it documents her journey to healing, I would say. And I mean, the prologue is rough. It's rough without being explicit. I had a person here at the University House who was sort of ended our friendship partly because she was so shocked by the prologue, and she said it made her want to vomit, and she was really angry about it. But in a way, I took that as a kind of very backward praise, because it made her do that without ever mentioning any of the rape words, without any specifics. So, and it took me about 2.5 years. It took me maybe almost a year to write it, and then at least a year and a half to edit it. And then I've been re-editing it ever since, and until it was published. So I'm glad it's published so I can stop editing it. So I think that's it. Adelaide, I knew Adelaide because they'd published some translations of mine from the Georgian. I met Stevan at the Frankfurt Book Fair, and we struck up a correspondence, and it ended with his publishing. It was kind of strange. I was really excited about my first novel. I have all these books, but this is my first novel. And he sent me the proofs, and I corrected them, and I did not sign the release. And the next thing I knew, the book showed up at the desk. So it was a surprise to me. Yeah. Wow. Hi there. Glad to see you.
So one of the things I found striking about The Aftermath was the details of the police investigations and the tools that he was using and so forth. Was there a story behind how you learned of those things? Or
I'm really glad you asked that question. So yes, years ago, maybe 20, 30 years ago in Milwaukee, I had the idea of doing this novel. And so I knew I read some books, but they really didn't answer my questions. So I knew I needed to speak to somebody who knew about this. So I went to various police departments And people, and it's kind of funny to, young woman walks up to you and says, would you mind talking to me about rape and sperm samples and test kits? And many guys were just completely kind of freaked out and scared off by this. They didn't know what was up. But I found this one guy who was so helpful and kind. And he answered all my questions. He showed me his rape kit and he talked about how it worked. And so when the novel, 25 years later is published, I wanted to get in touch with him, and I only had his last name, which was Ferrier, and he's the model for the male hero in the book. Mm-hmm. And so I called the police department. I looked around, but he had already retired, and I didn't have a first name, and I didn't have anything much to go on. So it looked like I was not going to be successful. And then I remember that he talked to me at the time. He was one of the first people, I think the second person into Jeffrey Dahmer's apartment. And he was the one, they had a search warrant and they didn't know what Jeffrey Dahmer was up to, but they knew it was bad, but they didn't realize how bad it was. And he opened the freezer. And I remember he said to me, I saw what no human being should ever have to see. And I thought, okay, Jeffrey Dahmer. So I looked up Jeffrey Dahmer. And in the newspaper articles and the pictures, they said the pictures were taken by Officer James Ferrier. So now I knew what his name was. So I called the police personal relations or public relations. And I told them that I was trying to track down James Ferrier, that he had worked for the Milwaukee Police Department but was retired. And he said, well, I won't be able, I think I can find him. I won't be able to give you his name or number. I said, I know, but he said, I'll give him yours. And the next day, I got a note from him saying that he had been successful. He tracked down James Ferrier and he said that he thought that he would write me. And right under that message was a message from James Ferrier himself saying that he'd gotten it. He was very excited. I sent him a copy of the book. We've been in correspondence ever since. And now he sent me a new story about the crash of Midwest Airlines in Milwaukee, killing 31 people on board. He was sent out with a camera and rubber gloves to photograph these bodies in a warehouse, and it was 90-degree heat, and the refrigeration unit had broken down. So that's all I have from him now, but it may lead to another story or a novel. He's been involved in all these wonderful, scary things that most people don't experience. And I find him really fascinating to talk to. And I'm glad that, he knows, he said his sons are very excited that their father is the hero of my novel.
Indeed. That is an interesting story. I thought, that those aspects to the book were captivating to me. I was like, I wonder how Lyn knows these things.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
There's nothing like, having somebody show, he unzipped his little case and he showed me everything, and he performed some of the tests. He talked about, blood typing and fingerprinting. He was a big advocate of fingerprinting and knew all about it. And so much of almost anything technical in the book that's about that is from him.
Wow.
By the way, right. I have a dog here. So at any moment, if I mute myself briefly, just
quite all right.
Okay.
We'll have a second guest then. I have a dog, the dog in the background talking too, so that's fine. And another thing I've been curious about, and I've known you for a few years, and I never asked, is how you became involved with the Republic of Georgia, especially with translations. When did that happen, and how did you get kind of wrapped up in that field?
Well, I should say that I'm good about any question except when. I have a terrible sense of time. So I don't know when anything. I remember the dates of my children's birthdays, and I remember the date that Mussolini came. See, there he is, Terry. Remember when Mussolini came to power, but other than that, I don't remember dates. But it was maybe the late 90s. I was Joseph Brodsky's teaching assistant. He went on to win the Nobel Prize, as you know, and a famous Russian dissident poet who taught at Michigan for 2 years. And I was chosen to be his teaching assistant. And that led to his writing the prologue to my Akhamatova translations. When there's a funny story about that, which I'll go into later if you want. But
Mhm.
it also led to I was on the World Council of Poets after that. And I talked to the head of the Hungarian Writers Union about my memories of Joseph Brodsky. And he said, oh, you have to write them down. And so he commissioned me and said he promised me Hungarian money that would be in the bank for whenever I wrote this. I think it's still there because I never got to Hungary after that. So maybe if I went to Hungary, I could collect some money. But so I
Mhm.
wrote this memoir, and a professor in Georgia whose specialty was Joseph Brodsky read it, and he said to me, he wrote me a letter and said he thought it was the best thing that anybody had written about Joseph. And he wanted to know if I had other memories or stories of Joseph Brodsky to share. So we started a correspondence, and then he found out I translate, and he said, well, you should translate Georgian poetry. He sent me a couple of poems. I translated them. He liked it, and he said he was going to bring me to Georgia. So,
Hmm.
like next year, he brought me to Georgia to teach as an assistant professor at at Tbilisi University, and we did a collection of translations from the Georgian that was published by Slavica Press, Slavica, which is Indiana University Press. And then he introduced me to Shota Rustaveli, and then I did a translation of Rustaveli's epic, and so on and so forth. But when I arrived in Georgia, I remember my family was very nervous because I didn't have an address where I would be. I didn't have a phone that would work in Georgia, and I had never met any of the people that I was going to be meeting. So they thought it was kind of crazy, but it worked out beautifully.
Hmm. And you won, your translation won the Sabbat Prize. Can you tell us a little bit about the prize and
Yeah,
process of entering that?
yeah, it was very cool. The Sabbat Prize is like the Pulitzer Prize, or even maybe the Nobel Prize for Georgia. I mean, it's the biggest prize. And my publisher had submitted the book, and they asked me to come, and I knew I was one of the finalists. And with the reception and the awards were held out of in the country in a big palace, which was amazing to have literary awards being distributed at a palace. But I was nervous because the format was that every finalist would have a little film clip presenting them and their book, and then they would announce, okay, and the winner from these finalists is such and such. And when it came to the award for translation, there was no little film clip at all. And I thought, oh, that's bad. They hadn't done a film clip of me at all, and there didn't seem to be anything about that. And then they made the announcement that I had won, and they said that I mean, maybe this, I shouldn't tell this as sort of like bragging, but the committee had felt that agreed unanimously that there was no other translation that they should even consider, that this was
Oh,
the
wow.
translation of the year. Rustaveli is the national poet. He's the big epic. It used to be that every bride got a copy of The Knight in the Panther Skin as part of her dowry. And people can quote whole books of this thing. They're taught to memorize huge portions of it in school, and they love Rustaveli. And so it was a great thing to be able to work on that.
Right, and I think it's an excellent translation. I mean, I can't speak of the quality of the translation, but I appreciate the English version that I've read most of. So going back to Akhamatova, as you mentioned, what was your interest in her? What did you discover about her as you were doing readings of her work?
Well, I mean, I loved Akhmatova's poetry. It was a very early translation of mine. I've been fascinated with Russian poets for a long time. Most recently, I tried to translate Osip Mandelstam, whom I absolutely think is fantastic. But for one thing, I couldn't get it. It's the first time in my translation career that, at least temporarily, I've given up. I don't have it. I can tell from my translations that they're not alive. They remind me of Sylvia Plath's poem about stillbirths. They're just, they're not good. And so that's one discouraging thing. The other thing is that there's this wonderful book called Stolen Air, I think it is. And it's Christopher Winan, maybe. He has an introduction by Ilya Kaminsky, who I really respect and love as a poet. And his poems, his translations, which are sort of halfway between sometimes being like versions and half like translations, are just terrific. So Akhmatova was something I worked with Sergei Shishkov, a Russian professor at the University of Michigan, and Brodsky was around and talking to me about Russian poetry. And so it was a combination of factors. And I loved Akhmatova. I think maybe one of the first things I ever read was the Requiem. And what really moved me was the part where the woman in the line for the prison, where Akhmatova is waiting to try to get some food or something to her son who's in prison. And a woman in line turns around and all these people are talking about how famous Akhmatova is. And the woman says to Akhmatova, "Can you translate? Can you describe this?" And Akhmatova says, "I can." And the woman, and she describes something like a ghost of a smile appeared on the woman's face. So Akhmatova is a model for activism, courage, a very active and courageous life, combined with terrific poetry.
Absolutely. That's a good description. So, would you like to share a poem or two with us of your own?
Sure, but I don't have them. I have to get it.
That's fine. Okay, I'll do a little segue.
Okay.
You're watching Parrot TV. Please subscribe. We're doing the 1 million viewer subscription challenge, as we are speaking with Lyn Coffin right now. So if you like the video, let us know in your comments below.
I actually enjoy links today. I'm following every bit of
Wonderful.
flow. So that's why just looking, waiting for her to keep giving us what we enjoy most every day. This is very important for us. We have been
absolutely
in terms of anything creative work like this. But I have a lot of questions for her after a presentation of the poem. You have to give me a floor to have a brief session with Lyn.
Okay.
Sure. Yes.
Love that.
Yeah.
So I'll read that. I'll read a poem that was commissioned by the city of Seattle. They used to have a program here called the Wordsworth Poet, and one poet would be chosen to come and read a poem to the City Council of Seattle. It was a great honor. It was done by Nick Licata, who's now retired, and I correspond with Nick. He's a great activist. But anyway, he would have a poet come, I think once a month, and preface the meeting of the City Council. And so this is the poem that I read. It's called The Reception Line, and it's one of my few that's autobiographical. Last night, I dreamt about Aunt Percy, the spunky alcoholic I so loved for being who she was, funny and flawed. Leaving a bar one night when she was young, she rammed her car into a back road bridge abutment, then made her way on heels to the closest farm and called the police, complaining that someone had moved the bridge. Aunt Percy Old was in my dreams reception line. She offered apricots, cold and sweet. Aunt Percy, I said, "You look wonderful," but thin, she said, and it wasn't good. A question came up. Someone in the family needed immediate help. "Don't worry," I said, which is almost always a mistake. I think dream talking with the dead may be a sign my own death. It may not be too far off, and there's little time left for me to call it like I think it is, which is the farthest honesty can take us while we breathe. In the dream, I spoke to my father and was glad to see him looking well. The last real time was in a Scottsdale hospital. I went in as soon as the nurses were done with bathing and shaving and feeding him. Garbled as he was, he got out my name and mumbled something about feet and cold. I rubbed his feet till he signaled me to stop, left a picture of my mother by his bed, and walked back to the nearby empty house, meaning to return after lunch. I was hardly in the door when the hospital called. In the dream, my father too was standing in the reception line. He looked happy and healthy. I said I was glad to see him. Then I added, speaking from someplace deeper than memory, "You're my father, among other things." When I woke up, I knew my father's love was like a ship, and the ship wrecked and went down, and wood floated to the shore of the island of my life. And I picked it up and used it for timber when the nights were cold. When we die, it doesn't matter what we had, only what we did. You may, like me, be so close to the edge, your feet are beginning to get cold. Your dead too may have formed a reception line, and so many in our family need immediate help.
Oh, that's beautiful.
I had a wonderful experience with that. So I read this poem, and then the protocol is that the poet leaves. They leave the chamber. So I left the chamber. They thanked me. I thanked them. I left the chamber, and I was out in the hall, but there was a TV going of the chamber. So it was sort of like Tom Sawyer getting to see his own funeral or whatever. I got to see what happened in the room after I left. And they were having a session on police brutality. And they gave a whole bunch of citizens, I think it was 3 minutes, to speak about police brutality. And the first speaker got up and he said, "I want to thank the poet." And he had tears in his eyes. And he said, "You know, my friend who was killed by the police, I think he's waiting for me in a reception line. And that's why this is so important." So it was incredibly moving. He didn't even know that I could hear him, of course. It was just, and he was taking his 3 minutes to thank me for the poem. It was a wonderful moment.
Wow.
Let's go to the technical part of this. Your writing, your poetry is prosaic. I mean, it's direct, straightforward, very easy to comprehend. Unlike some poets we used to have in the past that will be using certain meter like iambic pentameter, trochea, tetrameter, etc. Does it matter really these days to be using to measure a poem before you write? Is it really important?
So it's funny you say that, because the book that's coming out with Dustin's press, Transcendent Zero, is all sestinas and villanelles. And it also has in there 2 paradels, which is, a paradel is the most difficult form, I think, of any to write. It's incredibly difficult. And it was invented by Billy Collins as a kind of joke. But I've taken it seriously and managed to write a couple of paradels. So for me, I don't want to give up on the forms, and I don't want to give up on the street poems either. I was in a slam competition, and I think it's unfortunate. I love slam competitions. And the year that I was competing for Ann Arbor on the slam team, a young man named Reggie Gibson won the national title, the national slam title. And I heard Reggie Gibson perform a poem that I'll never forget. He begins as, it was about Jimi Hendrix, and he begins as a person in the audience listening to Jimi Hendrix. This is all in free verse, listening to Jimi Hendrix. And then he sort of changes and he is Jimi Hendrix. And then he changes and he is Jimi Hendrix's guitar. And then he changes and he becomes the guitar as Jimi Hendrix smashes it to bits. And he did this all in so-called, free form.
Mhm.
So, I mean, that's a wonderful poem. You wouldn't want to give that up. On the other hand, the parallels that I've written, and people always want to put you in one camp or the other, but I like to have a foot in both camps.
Another thing, one thing I also notice is that most poets will say that if you use certain form, it's difficult for you to actually convey your message because you have to try as much as possible to follow the rule at the same time convey your message. So it's easier to flow when you don't follow any form. What do you think about this?
Well, I think it's wrong-headed because I think for me, rhyme and form has a lot to give you. It gives you ways to discover things that you wouldn't discover if you weren't trying to write to a form or to a rhyme or to a scheme. So I used to say that rhyme was like an unwritten map. So you have these instructions, and you might get lost more easily. But so the danger of formless poetry, or this what's it called, authentic poetry. There's a whole school that is sort of very dominant in the United States now, which is you don't revise, and the first thought, the best thought, and it comes right out of your head. And I have some poems that are like that, and they can be wonderful, but it becomes a dogma that you have to be this way, and you can't revise, and you can't have rhyme, and you can't have form, which I think is a terrible mistake. So there are wonderful, I find wonder in all forms of poetry, and it depends who's using it. And I really like to feel that as an artist, I'm not shutting myself off from any of the colors. And so maybe today, one of the things I'd like to do is to read a very formal poem so you can see what I'm talking about.
I guess I
Sure,
would
go
love to
ahead.
have that if you can present that now, please.
Okay, let me see if I have it. Is the Paradell in this book? I can never remember what is. I have it next. If I don't.
If you are watching us for the first time, we're on Parrot TV Literary Corner. My name is Mutiu Olawuyi, and my co-host is Dustin Pickering. And on the show today, we have Lyn Coffin. We can refer to her as not only a poet, but what we will term as in literature, the literators or the literature. So she's both within and without the literary world. So that's why she decided to, if you've listened to her, you understand what I'm talking about. So we're lucky to have her on the show today, and I believe that we've gained a lot, and we have a lot to gain more from her. So if you're ready to present the poem, please over to you, Lyn.
Right. So it's not, again, this is sort of like formal things. I was looking for one poem and I couldn't find it, but I found another one, which I think will be good. This is a sestina form, and it shows, I think, what a form can give you. And it's called Sleeping Prince, the Wild Boy of Aveyron. I don't know if you know this story. This was in 1800 in France, that they found this boy who'd been living on his own, had never had any civilization or any human contact until he was, 11, 12 or something. So this is his story. January 1800, a naked boy crept out of the French woods, scooped fresh water from a ditch, dug potatoes, then made quick work of eating. He paid no heed as they closed in, but at the first touch, fought being taken with the soundless, whirling fury of a dream. Those who caught him were untouched by any dream of knowledge. It was just wrong for a naked boy to run wild. Their town had always taken morals to heart. They gave him clothes, food, water, spoke of release. But progress closed in on him. Historical forces were at work. A scientist named Itard began to work with the boy, A brilliant man fueled by a dream of freeing the humanity enclosed in that bestial husk, revealing the naked mind. The boy seemed to want only food, water, sleep. He might learn to speak if these were taken away from him. Itar didn't know what he'd taken upon himself. After years of hard work, the boy was toilet trained, wore clothes, drank water from a cup. But the original dream to make a civilized man from a naked boy was abandoned. Time and silence closed in. The boy was better about being closed in. He dressed himself, kept clean, liked being taken in hand by women. Still, he slept naked and touched girls who came to help with the work in ways that violated their common dream of love. He ate like a beast, but drank water like a saint. He could knife through the dark water of mountain lakes from dawn until night closed in. They gave him, still mute, to a woman whose dream was to have a son. After he'd been taken, Itar said he'd first known the boy was his life's work when he saw him sleeping, dreamless and naked. No kisses work. The mind stays closed in ice. Still, in wild dreams of bright water, a naked boy leaps free, laughs, and will not be overtaken. When you were saying about form, so it's to try to make a sestina sound, as you say, prosaic, to make it sound, have it be very clear, very easy to follow, and not feel like you're hammered with those 6 words over and over. And those words are water, work, in, taken, and dream. And you have to have those in every stanza, and you find a way to weave it. I did once, I was in a class taught by David Wagner, famous American poet, and I gave him a sestina. He was asking for people's bring in a poem. And so he criticized it in front of the class. He said it was very good, but I might like to think about writing something in a form. And I said, well, it is a sestina. And he went, oh my God, I should have known. So I felt that was successful, that he was criticizing a sestina because it didn't seem to him formal enough. He didn't get the idea that it was a sestina at all. So, but sometimes with rhyme, I could read one very short one that's in rhyme. It's just a funny one, but it's for Brodsky. I thought that might be fun to have a poem for Brodsky here. Okay. It's my Georgian scholar who loved Brodsky. He wanted a poem about him in rhyme. And so I wrote this one. It's called Brodsky Revisited. I write now to please my Gia with the Brodsky fantasia. Gia, you are Joseph's fan. He could have no better than. You know all the Brodsky saga, that he was for Auden, Gaga. Yet I need to make you wary of some digging in that quarry. In that old abandoned site comes the Irishman by night, praising Brodsky, Auden, Yeats. Is there nobody he hates? I'm not saying he's a thief. He's just got small cause for grief. I shared with Joseph when, alas, sexier than sex, his class. I was married, we were friends. There our story nearly ends. Soon he left our state behind, the Michigander state of mind. Years went by. We wrote, not much. Eventually, we lost touch. Then one day I read he'd died. I don't even think I cried. Joseph, you are where we'll be, postmarked to eternity. Your smokes are gone, your coffeeed curses. What remains of you is verses. In my recent dreams, I kiss you. When I read your poems, I miss you. And in these, how bright you shine. In your poetry, you're mine.
Fantastic. That's you use couplets throughout the poem. Each of the 2 lines rhyme from the beginning to the end. I was very fond of this style in the past, and these days I'm trying to switch from academic perspective, following the rule, to the street, according to you, what you just call it, the street style. Because I noticed that if you want to convey message to a lot of people, you need to simplify the content of your work. So if you're addressing the academia, they can understand better. That's just my own opinion with regards to that. Thank you so much for sharing these ideas with us.
Very welcome. I'm not sure. I think I would say that there's more, I taught for a long time in academia. I'm familiar with academia. I'm familiar with verse forms and allusions and irony. And and I'm also, having been slam and hung out with people on the street and street poets, I think there's more crossover than people know. So when you're a street poet, you can discover some of the truths that have been kind of classified in academia, and you can put them in your poems and move people and have a very strong message without knowing that, that Sappho wrote the same message, or that Sappho had similar sentiments, thousands of years ago. So I would just, it sounds like you have the best of both worlds. You know about academia, you know about street poetry. So just write your poetry, which will be a mix of the two.
We have less than a minute left, so I'm gonna go ahead and close. This has been the New York Parrot Literary Corner. Thank you so much for joining us, Lyn. And thank you to our viewers. Please subscribe, invite your friends, and tell others about us so that we may gain some subscribers. We're working on the 1 million subscriber challenge. So please tell others. And thank you again, Lyn, and thank our viewers as well. This is New York Parrot Literary Corner. I'm Dustin Pickering. Thank you.
Here's the only channel where we give platform to creative mind all over the world. Only TV station where we have that. We need to support ourselves. We need to appreciate ourselves. We thank you so much